Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Ada Burnett Cargill, Syria Mine Action AOR Area of Responsibility Co-Coordinator, and it is absolutely my pleasure to welcome you all to the Syria dedicated site event at this National Directors meeting in 2025. I want to say a couple of introductory words, and then I will present to you with the panelists that we have here and online today. I also wanted to welcome a number of our colleagues and participants online. And then we will kick off our discussion on possibilities, challenges, and possibilities in Syria. For almost 14 years, Syria has been subjected to the extensive use of explosive munitions. An estimated 1.2 million munitions have been dropped on Syria's cities, infrastructure, waterways and riverbeds, agricultural land and residential areas. The war has depleted Syria's economy, displaced millions of people, and exhausted Syrians physically, psychologically, and emotionally. At the start of 2025, 16.5 million Syrians were in need of humanitarian assistance. 15.4 million, or 2/3 of Syria's population, are at risk from explosive ordnance. We calculated these numbers before the changes in December 2024. Things have changed now significantly. While the December 2024 events brought hope for freedom of movement and the possibility to return, visit family, and assess property, they also brought to light the unprecedented levels of explosive ordnance contamination that has already taken lives and limbs across Syria. But we can make a difference in Syria. So this side event aims to relay the different challenges that the sector was facing before and how those challenges evolved in the new context. But more importantly, we wish to explore here today the breadth of opportunities that lie ahead of us, all for the purpose of safer futures for Syrians. So with that, I wanted to introduce today's panel. To my left is Mr. Joseph McCartan, the UNMAS Syria Program Director, Chief of Programs. Christopher Tierney, the Norwegian People's Aid Syria Country Director. Nicholas Torbet from Halo Trust, the Deputy Regional Director in the MENA region. And David Hilton, online, tuning in to us from Raqqa, the Syria Chief of Operations. I wanted to maybe hand over here at this stage to Joe to give you a bit of an overview over the contamination in Syria and generally the context that we are operating in. Joe, please.
Thanks, Ada, and thank you for perhaps picking the worst photograph of me that I've ever seen.
It was not me.
I think it was actually my staff trying to spike my guns. Look, thanks everyone for coming. This side event would not have been possible, or hasn't been possible in the last few years because of the highly politicized context of landmine clearance in Syria. But we'll touch on that later on. And it's nice to see colleagues from Syria actually at the event. I'd like to highlight Dr. Hala from UNDP and Dr. Hannah from the International Mercy Corps. And if any of you have a particular interest in victim assistance, I recommend going and speaking to Dr. Hala. The map on your left-hand side is taken from open sources, and it basically illustrates the use of explosive ordnance throughout the 14 years of the Syrian multiple civil wars, I suppose. Obviously, the deeper the red, the more the higher use of ordnance, and you can pick out a number of different things from that particular map. You can see that the Euphrates River Valley is particularly contaminated because of the fighting against the Islamic State. You can see that northwest Syria, particularly Idlib Western Aleppo, northern Hama, and northern Latakia are particularly affected. And indeed, there was an approximately 200-kilometre front line which saw the extensive use of anti-personnel mines and anti-vehicle mines. So potentially 400 kilometres that needs to be demined. And the Halo Trust recently released the first AP minefield cleared to international humanitarian standards in Idlib. You can see that the second city of Homs and the fourth city of Hama are particularly badly affected, as is rural Damascus and the southern governorates, particularly Dura. Next slide, please. Okay, so the change in a political authority on the 9th of December last year has seen a huge uptick in the number of casualties that are being reported. And this is an open source map from INSO. And what it illustrates a number of different things. It shows that the areas of most incidents are areas of high return, particularly in northwest Syria. The front line in particular saw no activity apart from fighting for nearly 14 years. So people have returned home. They've tried to go back to farming, tried to go back to grazing. They've tried to rebuild their homes. And there has been a huge spike in incidents in northwest Syria. Equally, people have returned from Jordan to Dura in the south. That has also seen a spike. And people have returned or tried to return back to their homes in Deir el-Zor in the east, largely from Turkey. There's also a seasonal spike at this time of year. The Syrians love their truffles, and I must admit they are quite delicious. And this time of year sees a spike in the number of people killed and injured hunting for truffles. The maps also demonstrate how humanitarian mine action needs to be relevant, both in the immediate humanitarian, in the immediate term for the humanitarian need as people return, but it also demonstrates the sheer scale of destruction that has happened in Syria over the last 14 years, and therefore how much mine action is going to be required in the longer term, not just to deal with the urban environments that have been damaged and destroyed, but also the longer reconstruction of critical infrastructure, because much of the canal networks have been destroyed, the electricity networks have been particularly badly hit, and therefore all of this will need to be repaired if Syria is to progress, and if people are to return home. And it really isn't an exaggeration to say that Syria almost needs to be rebuilt from the ground up. Next slide, please.
Oh, it's over there. Yeah. I think maybe, Joe, it's worth mentioning as well that in all of the 14 years, almost 14 years of war, the incidents involving explosive ordnance have been taking place all along. Yet mine action remained the most underfunded sector in the entire humanitarian response over the years, not just as of late. What we wanted to do is a little bit give you some of the operational challenges in different parts of Syria, how they used to look before, and what are the common challenges that we had before as operators. But at the same time, we wanted to sort of explore how these challenges have evolved with the new context, because they have changed. So this is approximately a picture of the context in Syria the way it used to be up until 8th of December. So what we had is basically 3 different hubs, 3 different areas of control. In the largest part being under control of the former Syrian government, while in the northeast, the control was under the Kurdish part of the population, while the HTS has been controlling the northwest Syria. All of these, basically, this is how the coordination structure looked as well. So we had 3 different coordination structures in different hubs, but then on top of those, we also had the whole of Syria coordination structure that was supposed to somehow bring in all those 3 hubs together, because none of the 3 hubs were speaking to each other, right? The most common challenges for everybody, I would say, certainly are the impact of sanctions is one of the biggest ones. Some of the majority of our partners were not able to receive any funds. There was, there was definitely an impact on the way the equipment was imported. And then, of course, there have been varying administrative impediments in all different parts of Syria and affecting partners operating in those parts of Syria as well in a different way. Of course, the ultimately most common challenge is the absence of funding. As I mentioned, Syria, mine action in Syria is the most underfunded sector. And as an example, it is, we can say that the 2024 HRP, the ask of 51 million was funded only 13%, 13%. Meaning that, you know, there has been really an absence of funding and the lack of means to actually address the issue of contamination. So I will actually hand it over to Chris Tierney, the country director of NPA, to discuss a little bit more and talk about a little bit of different challenges that have been affecting NPA operating and partners operating in southern and central Syria, so former government-controlled areas. Over to you, Chris.
Thanks, Ida. Just as a bit of background, Norwegian People's Aid has been operating in the whole of Syria since 2012 in support of the people of Syria, trying to keep them safe on the livelihoods, development, SGBV and democratisation fronts. But it wasn't until 2020 that we decided that we would try and get into mine action within the government-controlled areas of south and central Syria. At that point in time, it took us a while to get permissions through the government at the time, and it was our first experience of trying to crack through the bureaucracy that was in place. So by the end of 2021, we had finally signed an MOU that permitted us to do 2 activities in the government-controlled areas at that time, and that was non-technical survey and clearance. The teams that we sent out were heavily scrutinised. Before we could even recruit staff, they had to have security vetting checks, and that's through 4 different government security agencies before we could even do any training with them. All this took time, so average 3 to 4 months for that to occur. It took 18 months to get equipment into country, and a lot of this delay was that the government had never dealt with an organisation, an international NGO, trying to bring in technical equipment that was dual use into a country. We also had to, on the back end, get permissions, import licence, end user certificates from a number of different governments that we got our equipment from. For example, Norwegian government, British government, US government, and others as well. So all this was a very heavily bureaucratic process. When it came to having access to the ground itself, we were not given any information from the government. They would not tell us what was going on in the areas, and we had to find out for ourselves. But before we went into an area, we had to apply at village level. So we had to apply village by village, and they would only give us one village at a time. The average time it took to get the next village approved was 3 to 4 months. So all this was dragging out the operations, which meant that our productivity was very, very low because we couldn't move as fast as what we wanted to do. We had the capability of doing that, but we were held back. On many occasions, we were told that we were not allowed to deploy into the field. There was, at that particular point in time, National Committee for Mine Action, and they were the central point of contact for us. We had to apply through them for everything. They would then refer it off to the other different government departments, and we would have an answer back from the National Committee. That National Committee was appointed by the former president, and since that time it no longer exists. It was disbanded as of the 8th of December. The sanctions environment definitely hampered us. You know, we would have desperately loved to get some US government funding under the previous government's mechanisms. However, because of sanctions, the US would not fund any mine action in the government-controlled areas. And there was a number of other donors as well that would not fund these. There was a lot of suspicion of us in there. We were very heavily scrutinised. They told us where we could live, where we could have an office, where we could move. And we actually had 2 of our staff, expat staff, persona non grated, and they wouldn't give us a reason why. So a very complex situation. However, the situation that we are coming into now and our memorandum of understanding with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs has been honoured by the new interim government, which we are very appreciative of. So we still can continue to work, and there are now opportunities coming up, which I'll explain in a little bit.
Thank you, Chris, very much. Exactly, I think we'll take the opportunities a little bit later because they are many, but there are challenges with some of the opportunities as well. I will hand it over now to Nicholas from Halo Trust. Halo Trust has been operating in northwest Syria. Northwest Syria is a little bit specific because it was a small area sort of geographically, and only 2 clearance and survey partners have been operating there, and Halo was one of them. So Nick, over to you.
Thanks, Ada. Can I have the next slide, please?
Sorry?
Next slide, please.
Oh,
No worries.
Sorry.
I'll start with an observation and an apology. It's a bit of a shame that the first Syrian side event doesn't have a Syrian on the panel. I should have been represented, or Halo should have been represented by our Deputy Country Director, Moyad. But Moyad has had quite a busy first few months of the year, a busy Ramadan, and is enjoying an Eid break with his family. It's also a shame because he's much funnier and much more charming than I am. So there we go. Please bear with me. Halo has said we've been in Syria since 2018. Mostly we started off in the south in Daraa, and we had a small operation in the northwest. The focus then changed when Daraa fell to government hands, and we refocused up in the northwest. For context, now we've got about 120 staff, 6 mechanical teams, and 10 sort of EOD teams doing EOD survey and risk education, and that's set to expand quite significantly in the coming months. In terms of previous challenges, I'll sort of start with a bit of an anecdote. Access and equipment was a big issue to begin with, to the point that we had to bring Syrians out of Syria, train them up, and then put them back in. And we initially did that in Jordan. And when we first brought out the first Syrians, we ran them through training in the Jordanian training facilities. And we put them through survey, EOD, etc. And for those of you who've done an EOD course, we did the classic, there's 2 cluster munitions on the roof of a clinic. You need to get them off using, this hook and line, a couple of pieces of rope, and the usual expectation that it wouldn't actually happen, but it's a good way to train people. And so they went through the whole routine. We sent them back into Syria. The third task the team had to deal with was cluster munitions on the roof of a mosque, and they duly set up, a pretty complex hook and line system to make it work. And I think that's just a sort of example of the sort of ingenuity and professionalism of many of our Syrian staff. They removed a threat with some pretty limited initial training and some pretty limited equipment. The access went a little bit beyond that, particularly in the northwest. We were working from Turkey, and we had to deal with Turkish registration to facilitate our logistical moves into the northwest, which was difficult. It required renewal every year, and we lost Turkish registration at one point, which made our lives much more challenging. Similarly, the operating environment that Ada mentioned was very small. Our capacity could have been a little bit larger. We weren't, at maximum capacity for the space we had, but we weren't far off it, and we had a limited number of tasks. That's not to say they weren't important. If you look at the top two photos there, that's Halo's mechanical teams pre-December last year working in an IDP camp. And in one of the wells had been used in an ammunition dump, and they found about 1,000 items of ordnance inside a well right in the middle of an IDP camp. So the complexity of both physical geography in terms of the whole operating space, but a very confined geography when you actually come to tasks, was one of the challenges. And of course, relocating a number of IDPs had its own challenges. Other stuff, the complex political space, again, both the sort of macro stuff of setting up in Daraa, establishing relationships in Daraa, and then having to switch very quickly to the northwest, but also the more localized ones, particularly when we first went into the northwest, a fragmented governance structure, a complex series of relationships the team had to make there. We couldn't get international staff into Syria, or could perhaps once or twice a year as part of a fairly complex piece of logistics. But actually that didn't matter too much. And I went back to Syria a month ago, 2 months ago, and it didn't feel like a program that had been running without, HQ oversight for 4 or 5 years. It felt like a very professional, albeit small program. So I think I'll pause there on our initial challenges. On the plus side, what we were able to leverage even in those early days was the expertise of our Syrian staff. It was a very well-educated population that we could draw from, a very passionate population, and they have stuck with us for the whole period. And that actually made, as I say, setting up in Syria very easy. And donor funding was certainly complex, but it wasn't insurmountable. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Nick. Really, quite a challenging and different ways of operation. I wanted to actually reach out to Dave now, who is online joining us from Raqqa. David from HI. HI has been operating in northeast Syria, doing clearance and NTS there for the majority of the time. And at the same time, northeast Syria is actually the part of Syria where most of the mine action work has been done over the past few years. There are large partners operating in there as well. Some of them are in the room here with us. But I wanted to hand it over to David. You will see him hopefully up there in the small corner. We have not figured out together with the colleagues here how to make that a little bit larger. So Dave, over to you.
Good afternoon, everybody. I hope you can see me okay. I hope you can hear me okay. I must send my apologies that I'm not there in person, but it looks like it's been a good turnout. But I would also like to thank my colleagues that have gone before me for everything that's been said, and the support that they do give us. So from me, I would just like to jump onto everything that's been said by our colleagues, of literally our situation. HI itself have been operating in Syria since 2012. Right off from the bat, when the conflict started. Now, there has been multiple changes in that. With HI themselves, as you know, we have been kept ourselves to the northeast. So our border, quite literally, being between south and east, is the Euphrates River. So we were always working to the east of that, and obviously I must apologise to the west, where we have our other colleagues, MPA, which are right down, further down in Damascus. We have Halo, which are up in the Aleppo area. So for ourselves, it was exactly the same situation. You know, we had the issues, the major challenges of getting equipment in, and like my colleagues have said, you know, it was down to political situations, nothing more, of trying to help people, of getting the equipment in through different areas. For ourselves, you know, we predominantly rely on Erbil to get a lot of our equipment in. But not only that, we have offices in Lebanon where we can get them through to the border, which would then come through Damascus, which then would have to get vetted, as has already been discussed by my colleagues there, of saying we need various checks, we needed various people, other organisations, other agencies to verify what was coming through, what it was for, and why it was needed, and who it was for. So the challenges haven't changed for any of us. In that respect, to do with teams, we have been lucky on this side. We have been able to get freedom of movement through Erbil as long as the crossing between Syria and Erbil is open and running, which at present time is good. It works very well. Again, that is a challenge with getting authorizations, but the system is in place and it has really helped us. For our current situation at the moment, I would just like to go through the current team setup. At the moment, we have 3 teams, which are 1 EOD team, 2 multitask teams. We have 17 EOR NTS teams. Now, these are spread out in NES and Northwest. At the present time, in NES, we do carry out clearance operations, BAC, NTS, ERE, and victim assistance. Within the Northwest, at present time, we are carrying out ERE and NTS, and that is in Idlib. Now, the makeup of that is as follows. You know, for NES itself, we have Can you hear me all right? Sorry, I keep breaking up this end.
Yes, we can, Dave.
Sorry. So
No worries,
obviously for NES in ourselves, as I said, we have 3 OD teams which are currently based in Raqqa. We are able to support NES from Raqqa. We use Tabqa, which is the old air base, which was used by coalition forces, and the big battle of Tabqa commenced between ISIS and coalition forces. Not only that, we move further on to Deir ez-Zor. Now, Deir ez-Zor is a talking point for all of us that are now sitting in this room. Deir ez-Zor itself is heavily contaminated, is heavily underfunded, and is in need desperately of all sorts of assets required to help them to bring themselves back up to a livable standard. I've been lucky enough to actually go visit Deir ez-Zor most recently, and the devastation is phenomenal. And as Joe pointed out right at the start, the season came in when it was truffle season, and within that area and within that government, you know, it is horrendous of the people that are going out to retrieve these truffles, but they have no option. This is their living. This has been going on since the dawn of time for their truffles. And of course, the accidents are occurring because we are unable to support in the way we'd like to because of the decimation and the disruption of the infrastructure. And when I mean by this, I mean the medical facilities, the medical care that is available, not only to any NGOs, not only to NGOs, but also to those national peoples themselves, the citizens of Deir ez-Zor themselves. You know, they are desperate for simple medication, such as bandages, plasters, even aspirins. They're desperate. You know, and this is being looked into most dramatically. And MSF, as was already mentioned at the start by Joe, are themselves in Deir ez-Zor, and at the moment at the Deir ez-Zor National Hospital doing an emergency room to prep and help the people of Deir ez-Zor. So with HI themselves, we are ready to go. We have teams ready and able to help, but our only concerns is with Deir ez-Zor itself. It's the infrastructure, as already said. Just recently, a bridge crossing has just been put across Euphrates, which has saved time, but that still needs improving. The medical facilities do need improving to help with any NGOs or INGOs that will be putting their staff into that area to help out with the clearance. That's within Deir ez-Zor itself and the surrounding areas, especially the deserts. So it's the same story. It's all about funding. It's all about helping the people. But not only that, with the recent change of administration, with the interim government now in, NES itself does have NESMAC, obviously the Mine Action Centre, which they are our guiding light. As Nick from Halo pointed out, and so did everyone else on the panel, we have to speak to our people. We have to speak to these people to ask their permissions to go and help their own citizens. When an item is discovered, we cannot just react to it and respond to it as we'd like to. We have to inform NESMAG, given the grids, given what the situation is, then we have to wait for their approval. Now, of course, NESMAG at the moment are not autonomous. They have to rely on other agencies, other governmental agencies, I should say, such as the internal security forces, as their guiding light to go into areas so we have the safety and security of our own team members of going in there. So this at the moment is a situation that is being worked on to give them the capabilities and give them the helping hand they need to be able to understand the complications of getting teams out on the ground, why they need to be out on the ground, and they need to respond quicker. Because the longer we let tasks go by, there are more accidents occurring. So with the interim government, there needs to be correspondence on both sides now, you know, between the Northwest and the Northeast. You know, there just needs to be that divide still, but there is a massive opportunity here now for all of us to engage all together and start making one department that is going to be overarching in controlling all our taskings.
Thank you, David. Thanks, David. I wanted to pick up on the point that you rose about existing authorities in Northeast Syria, while there is no national authorities in Damascus as of yet on mine action. But I wanted to revert back to Joe, because UNMAS is both cluster lead agency in charge sort of a coordination of mine action in general in Syria, but at the same time, UNMAS is also the normative agency and has a very specific role in specific situations in a context. So I wanted to actually hand it over a little bit to Joe and to speak a little bit about UNMAS and what UNMAS's role has been in the previous sort of context and what it entails now in this new context and in the new changed Syria. Joe, over to you.
Yeah, so is there a next slide?
There is a next slide, indeed. Oh, no.
Oh, no.
Sorry, that's the one.
Oh, Ada changed the slideshow. So UNMAS began operating in Syria in 2018 and really came in as at least in what was Assad-controlled territory, as the first international mine action organization. It wasn't until 2021 that UNMAS was actually able to deploy survey and clearance teams into rural Damascus. I got in at the end of 2022, and there was a problem which I identified, which is housing, land, and property issues. I think Hannah and Hala, you can correct me, but in about 2016 or 17, the Syrian government introduced, I think it was at Law 10, that basically said everyone who has left Syria has to come back and re-register their apartments, or else the government will essentially take it from them. So there were political challenges of surveying and clearing in certain areas when we didn't actually know what would happen to either the housing or the land. If what we're doing in, for instance, Daraa, if the government can simply come in and seize that land from the people who owned it, but then had to flee their houses. So the UNMAS focus changed from picking areas to clear to acting as an enabler of other UN agencies, of asking UNDP in particular, where are you working? You are going to need support, for example, in the old souk of Aleppo, or in Latakia following the earthquake. Same with UNDP, or having OCHA or UNHCR to identify high areas of return, so that we could focus in what I view our main role as an implementer, at least, of an enabler for other UN agencies, funds and programs. And the issue that Chris mentioned is that, yes, there was notionally a national authority, but the national authority was more interested in some ways of preventing MPA working because of perceived security risks, rather than working with mine action partners to develop national technical standards and guidelines. So UNMAS also assumed the role of the de facto mine action center, especially after MPA arrived, providing desk and field accreditation, providing quality assurance, with my role then of trying to convince the Syrian authorities to that this is a task that they should be doing, and they should be investing in their own national mine action center. Our role going forward, or is that's later?
We are going forward now and discussing a little bit what are the opportunities. I mean, we've heard of all the challenges, and I don't think that this session would be enough to actually list all the challenges that existed and that are still existing in Syria, because it's not an easy context to operate in. However, there are certain things that have gone forward and things that have moved ahead, since December 8. So mine action area of responsibility is the first sector in the entire Syria humanitarian response that has united all the previously existing coordinating structures. So we did that in January already, and really cemented it in the beginning of February, when we got together and adopted also the terms of reference for the area of responsibility that was adopted by all the partners. So in that context, it is an AOR that has taken its opportunities, and it's taken its opportunities also to sort of revive some of the previously existing working groups that have been a little bit sleepy for quite a number of years, but then also start new working groups in order to be able to better respond to the crisis. So the AUR itself basically has started the risk education working group, revived it. It has been sort of stagnant for a number of years with all the intricacies of difficulties to operate and to get together. At the same time, we have revived as well the victim assistance working group. We have a number of people here, 2 people who have basically been responsible for starting that. They're sitting here in the room so they can speak a little bit more about the VA working group. And then we have started the Mine Action Information Management Working Group, which is really one of the most crucial ones, given that the key challenge as well was, while we were a divided country and had 3 different divided responses, there was also a divided data collection going on. And it was now we have the opportunity through the IM working group to actually manage to get all of these things together and standardize the response. So that's one of the key advantages and key opportunities. And then finally, we also have the survey and clearance working group where, the organizations and the partners who are doing survey and clearance are going to, be able to finally sit together and discuss all these technical things and possibilities and exchange experiences, which they were not really able to do so before. So with that in mind, I wanted to hand it over back again to Chris at the MPA, because there's been some progresses taking place, certainly for all of our partners, but I thought I'll hand it over to you, Chris, to say a little bit more.
Next slide, please.
Yes, sorry. Should have given you all the...
Since the 8th of December, there have been many, many changes, and the new interim government has cancelled a number of laws. One of the laws that affected us the most in the mine action under the former government-controlled areas was the rubble law. Basically, the rubble is owned by the people that owned the building previously. So therefore, if we need to search through rubble, we can search through it, but we have to put it back where it was, which was basically at least double handling of the rubble, for example. That law has now been abolished. So that is a step in the right direction. There has been a change in the security environment as well, with less time to get permissions to work in areas. Previously, the 4 different intelligence agencies had to coordinate with Hezbollah, the Iranians, with the Russians, as well as their own military forces to enable us to get into these areas. Now we go to the local security elements that are there and make an agreement with them and get approval through the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So that process now is a lot faster, a lot more streamlined, so we're able to deploy on the ground. Thankfully, we invested a lot of our time last year in training our national staff. So we now have people that train the trainer qualified on quality assurance, on battle area clearance, risk education, building clearance, and the whole gamut of mine action activities. So the previous delays, we didn't waste our time, we trained our local staff. And that is proven this year, where we have had our national staff train additional staff that we've employed to go out and perform the work. There is a greater possibility to expand operations, and of course this comes down to funding. And I'd like to call on any of the donors or any other interested people and organisations that wish to donate to the Syrian Mine Action Programme as a whole, not just the MPA, but the whole of the country, to please do so. We're grossly underfunded and desperately need it. The map that you see there with the C123456 on it is actually Yarmouk Palestinian Refugee Camp, which is a southern suburb of Damascus itself. It was heavily fought over during the Civil War, and it was held by ISIS. The government forces eventually pushed ISIS out of there, but the result of that was that a third of the buildings are completely flattened, a third of them are destroyed to a level that they're not habitable, and the other thirds were contaminated to a certain extent. To show the difference between what had happened over the last years and what's been able to occur this year, over the period of 2023 up until the end of November 2024, we were only able to clear the buildings in areas C1 and half of C3. We were expecting that at the rates that we were going, it would take us another 18 months with the current capacity that we had to clear the rest of the buildings that were there. With the change of government and increased access, without the limitations that were placed on us previously, we were able to complete the clearance of all those sectors that you see there by the 28th of February this year. That represents 80,000 housing units. The opportunity for 80,000 people to return to Yarmouk Palestinian refugee camp. Up until that stage, when we started, there was only 3,500 people in there. And as of the end of February, there was more than 20,000 and more people were coming back in. These people were from all over the country and also external as well. So there is a great opportunity there for expansion of operations to be able to do this in more areas, because this can be replicated across the country. The devastation that you see there, and then you see the picture on your right there, is a window in a building surrounded by rubble, but somebody wanted to move back into their house. They wanted to move back there, that was theirs, they were back there to complain it. And I call this picture a window of hope. These people had hope that they would come home, and they actually have. There is a need for rapid response, because the communities need to see that there is action. And the government currently doesn't have the capabilities. They're still trying to work out politically how this process will go forward. So this is where the international community can help support international organisations as well as national organisations as well. NPA is working currently with a number of different organisations, and we hope to start a new project where local organisations that do agricultural support will be trained in non-technical survey, so that we can create a new national asset that when the government comes online and they can do disposal, when they can do clearance, NPA can take a step back and the government can take over that. But there is still a national capacity that we're leaving behind. There is great opportunity. Of course, it all comes down to the funding, and there is huge scope for more players in mine action to come. NPA is fully supportive of UNMAS and fully supportive of all the other organisations in the country that are working towards making Syria safe for the people of Syria.
Thank you very much, Chris. Absolutely. When you think about it, Syria, in fact, is quite vast, and the contamination is so severe. So there would be a lot of work. There is a lot of work for plenty of all the partners, and even more for years to come. And sort of given the, on this note, I'm handing it over back to Nick, because I think when it comes to northwest Syria, that was such a small, well, small on the map, but geographically quite massive, actually. But in that area that was so sort of limited to operate in, what are the new opportunities for partners, for Halo and for other partners operating from northwest Syria, and what have you what could you see?
Thanks, Ada. I suppose, yes, the challenges are the opportunities, and the opportunities are the challenges, to use a trite cliche. I mean, previously, as I mentioned, our issue, it was quite a small geographical area, relatively speaking, but coordination was easier. And now we have freedom of movement across Syria, but less ability, a reduced ability to coordinate. In the northwest, pre-regime change, there was more or less just us and the white helmets, and we had a sort of reasonably common understanding that the white helmets were slightly more reactive and we'd do some of the more deliberate clearance. And that's clearly now changed. The whole region has opened up. But what is, I think, a huge positive is, and this is not always the case, that pretty much all the actors have a common vision for mine action in Syria. The UN, the operators, and although the government is a little overwhelmed at the moment, I think they genuinely, want us to progress in the way we would like to. In terms of some specifics, obviously the big difference now is our ability to move around and operate. I've been in many post-conflict environments or post-political change environments where we've tried to set up and expand operations, and even getting off the plane and getting a visa has been hugely challenging, never mind getting operational teams from task site to task site. That is different for us. It was always more straightforward, I think, for us in the northwest than those operating out of Damascus, but thus far our teams have been able to continue working throughout the change in regime. I was able to drive from Jordan through Daraa up to Aleppo with almost no hindrance, and our teams are able to do the same, which is a huge positive. There are specifics as well. Although bringing in dual-use equipment because of the sanctions is a challenge, you can procure a good quality mechanical plant and have it armoured in Syria. Why the quality of armouring machinery is so good in Syria is probably best left for another discussion, but we've been able to do it and do it at quite some rate and relatively sort of economical ways. Similarly, I think gender parity is another great possibility for Syria. Halo's operated between sort of 25 and 40% male to female ratios, sort of female to male ratios, depending on where we were in our recruitment cycle. There's no reason we couldn't be at 50% across all operational and management roles in Syria. I think there's some challenges around mechanical clearance, but certainly very easy to overcome. Funding has been mentioned before. I would say, yes, there's always room for more funding, and you asked me what the funding gap was. I could give you almost any number because, as we've heard, the needs are really significant. But there are some donors who've been very flexible and reacted very quickly. In Halo's case, Germany and our existing donors, such as France, have moved with us as the regime has changed and allowed us to expand at a sustainable rate. We could do a little faster, as I'm sure all our other colleagues could, but I would be reasonably, I'm reasonably comfortable with where we are at the moment. There's also a great opportunity, we heard it in the plenary this morning, to get the right standards and approach things, use the right standards that set Syria up for success. And don't become a bureaucratic impediment. Individual tasking orders, individual accreditations of teams. We can avoid all of that. We can ensure land release is applied where land release needs to be applied, and survey is done diligently and carefully. But where that approach is less required in rubberized buildings, we can take a new approach, which I think many events this week are discussing. And as a final one, Halo is now able to get to places we've never been, to the former front lines, and I've been to some, and as with the rest of my colleagues, some pretty challenging and at-need places. But I think it is a rare opportunity for the sector to be able to access areas where the greatest humanitarian need is. There's no security impediment at the moment. There aren't huge bureaucratic impediments. The minefields are complex, but not excessively so. And it's very within reach of a large Syrian workforce, large-sized Syrian workforce to tackle those. And I know everyone says it's always about the money, but in this case, I think it really is. I think if money was injected into the sector at sufficient rates, I think there's enough collaboration, there's enough there's enough capability within Syria to resolve the problem quite quickly and transition to a sort of a more nationalised capacity in the medium to long term with international actors taking a sort of slow step back to look towards more sort of technical assistance and oversight where necessary. I will end there.
Thanks so much, Nick. I think I wanted to piggyback a little bit on the access thing, and now partners being able to move across the former front lines and reaching out and accessing different places in Syria that they have not been able to do before. On that note, I actually wanted to hand it over back to you, Dave, to discuss a little bit, this access in Northeast Syria and where and how things have been functioning and what are the opportunities now and what have been opportunities so far since the changing context in December. Dave, you're with us?
I am, Ada. Hopefully you can all hear me and see. Excuse me. Excellent. Right. Again, thank you, Ada, for the introduction. Again, thanks to my colleagues. Yes, here in NES, as has been mentioned, there is a massive opportunity now within the whole of Syria. Now it's been opened up, the freedom that we go, but especially in NES, that support is still massively needed. We now have the opportunity to integrate, our existing and everyone else's existing mine and action authorities in NES and throughout to support capacity building. So we have this idea of the capacity building of support in NESMAG, to solidify, as Nick mentioned earlier, about task orders, jobs being who they're given to, how they're resolved, and how we get through to them, and the challenges that are being given to us still. The biggest one for us with having the freedom is the opportunity to expand the victim assistance. What I mean by that is streamlining the inclusion of persons with disabilities. As we all know, it's not just the disabilities you can see. It's the mental disabilities that are unseen to people. The traumatization of the children, of the up and coming, youth of Syria, what they've been put through, what they've seen, this needs to be addressed as well, and it can be. It's physical as well as mental. On the physical side, yes, prosthetics, as you see on the picture on the left-hand side, thanks to our donors again, the German donors, we have one hospital, Kazra, just outside Deir ez-Zor, in the government of Deir ez-Zor actually, that these prosthetics are locally manufactured, by local people. And as you see in the picture, they do go through their rehabilitation, they do go through fitting, and they do get assessed, and it keeps going on and on. But that's to the extreme. As I said, it's the mental capabilities as well that we should be looking at, and this is to understand and better address things. As you see on the right-hand side, the picture, exposed ordnance, that's a risk education, how can I put it, stance that's being put on to the people to inform them of the dangers, to permit them to not have the injuries that you see on the left-hand side. This one is to the children, they are tailor-made to the adults as well. But this is a massive part that, again, needs to be integrated with the mine action. It needs to be integrated with the mine action authorities for NESMAG in particular to take a grip of this and understand that it's not just clearance that is required. It is these people's well-being that is required, mentally and physically. Expansion of operations. I did say earlier, Deir ez-Zor. Deir ez-Zor's massive. But because of what's happened, we have the freedom of movement now, and also with the help between agencies, government agencies, of starting to get their own citizens looked after by putting roadways, the infrastructure back up and running. Just recently, a bridge has been opened between Deir ez-Zor and other towns, which without it, they were having to do a 40-minute trek roundabout, which for them to get to medical facilities was very difficult. So now we have access to both sides of that Euphrates, the north and the west. So that is a big thing to have. And the one thing I'm being able to redeem myself here, and I've got to apologise to you all and the audience there. On the previous slide, you saw two pictures of waterways. Now, that was to demonstrate that HI themselves do have a clearance capability to go into water. Ada, thank you very much. As you can see on the left-hand side, what's happening there is in one of the lakes up near Tabka, you see a drone, an ROV, going into the water, which is to assess if there's any contamination in that water. Now, lo and behold, of course there is. You know, as you see the picture on the right-hand side, we have a diver in the water who's, you know, coming up, and water's just been brought out of the water. But this is just one example. The primary example for this is quite literally, you know, the key role in clearing the riverbeds, the riverways within Syria themselves. You know, the Euphrates River is highly contaminated, you know, and with this contamination, it is contaminating the water which is required to go to the reservoirs, to go to the water plants, which is then being put onto the people who use it for drinking. So what I was trying to say there is literally we are now at the forefront of being able to go from land into water, you know, with the capabilities at our disposal. And the one benefit that did happen, which was 18 months ago, no, less than that actually, about 9 months ago, it was the key role in clearing the riverbed beneath the Al Rasid Bridge here in Raqqa. Obviously, throughout the fighting, it was destroyed, and again, it caused a time lag for people to go see their other families, to go and get crops, to go get food, because it was the main route from Raqqa all the way to Tabqa, and even the road on the way to Damascus. So, you know, with the aid of being supported with diving equipment, a team was upgraded, instructed on diving capabilities, instructed on using equipment underwater and retrieving contamination from the rivers themselves. You know, and this was a massive and significant socio-economic win for everyone, especially the people, you know, within Raqqa.
Thank you, David. David, thank you so much.
Sorry.
No worries. I just wanted to revert back. Thank you so much. There is an echo in the room. Somebody's online. I just wanted to basically hand it over back to Joe, because in order to be able to discuss about opportunities, there is a massive opportunity now to sort of start the discussing on the National Mine Action Authority and where we can, you know, nationalize the mine action and what are sort of the deadlines and what are the outlooks. So, Joe, over to you maybe to give us a very quick rundown of what the possibilities are, what the options are, and how have we managed to unite as a sector?
I just want to know who your photographer is. Look, both Chris and Nick have touched on this, and I think it's the UNMAS role as well. The Syrians are perfectly capable, or will be perfectly capable with our assistance, of taking care of their own problem, because it is going to be a long-term problem. So, you know, for UNMAS, I think our ultimate goal going forward is to build a national capacity within the National Mine Action Authority so that they can take control of their own contamination problem. We also collectively, the operators in UNMAS, need to work together to really map out the extent of contamination in Syria. A lot more has been done in the northeast than in the northwest or in what was Assad-controlled territory. So to that end, you know, I've managed to raise some cash, and most of it is going to the INGOs to come up with a baseline survey that will drive clearance operations going forward. And Nick is completely right. You know, we can work together to build national technical standards and guidelines, and it's very, very much a collaborative approach, with UNMAS being the coordinator, but huge input from the INGOs and from the operators. And I think it's actually, for Mine Action in Syria, it's the most positive time that any of us have experienced, and a lot of us have been there for quite a while. So we really do have an opportunity to build a huge mine action response throughout Syria that wasn't there before. I'll hand back to Ada for her recommendation.
Thank you so much. I think we would need at least 2-3 more of events of this length to actually be able to discuss everything that is on the table. But I certainly wanted to, I don't know why it's hopped over to the Q&A. We're going to hand it over back to you. But I wanted to somehow hand over a few recommendations to different actors. And certainly, some of them are definitely to the new authorities. And now, really, there is a possibility to positively engage with the mine action sector and with a view to building own institutional capacities to actually assume responsibilities to address contamination. Ultimately, it is the new authorities or any authority's responsibility to address the contamination. I think there is a point to ask the new authorities as well to recognize the unique role that mine action has in rebuilding Syria and in meeting the immediate needs of the population. The recommendation certainly is to work to sort of simplify these administrative processes that are in the way of operators registering in Syria, bringing in qualified staff, and of course to expand operations. And of course, we wouldn't be amiss to recommend to the new authorities to please accede to international treaties and bring Syria really into the fold of the nations working together to abolish mines and other explosive ordnance. And of course, we have to send recommendations to the donors and especially also to the donor countries. It is absolutely imperative that donors recognize that mine action is a prerequisite to any and all humanitarian, early recovery, reconstruction, and development interventions. And that it's not a sort of shall we or shall we not, but it's actually a must to fund and to support because all the other interventions are very much dependent. Certainly the reconstruction part is going to be very dependent on us clearing the way, not only for Syrians, but also for humanitarian aid workers that are trying to implement programming and serve the Syrian population. What we would ideally want from the donors as well is the increased and unrestricted funding for mine action, especially to support non-technical survey and clearance operations, to help us also establish these emergency response teams, which are extremely, extremely needed at this stage, and to enhance risk education efforts and improve access of survivors of explosive incidents to access to medical services, but beyond medical services to access to protection services, because that is lifelong. And of course, we would want the donors to help us remove impediments to operate in Syria by opening possibilities to import equipment, help us move specialized staff, advise the new government as well on how these things should be made easier for us as operators. And with that, actually, I wanted to hand it over to you, the audience, and see if you would have questions for us. Let me double check if there are some questions online. No, the photographer is not me. Yes. Yes. Please introduce yourself and then.
Hello, from UNDP Syria Country Office. I will add just in addition to, let's say, kind of recommendation for the authorities and for donors, also as a kind of commitment from ourselves as an actors in the mine action. Initially, it's an opportunity, the changing context in Syria give us, all the actors, an opportunity really to coordinate, to integrate our work and to prioritize the intervention because the needs are huge. So it's a matter nowadays to see the prioritization process, how we want to look at it, and developing hand in hand rather than just acting from a humanitarian perspective, because it's now we are looking more towards kind of the recovery and even hopefully in the future for development. So how we can integrate the mine action into this process. We know that in Syria, they start working at the UNCT level on developing the transitional action plan. So how to make sure that the mine action is well integrated in this plan and how we can work together on it. So it is kind of commitment from ourselves that this is what we wanted to do. And maybe it's a more kind of very optimistic to start shifting even kind of the center that we wanted to have it from more kind of land perspective to more kind of health perspective, so we can take it from more kind of communities and people-centered approach. And by doing this, as mentioned by Nick, that it will be, if you wanted to add more kind of the medical solution, how we can integrate it into the whole. So it's overall, it's an opportunity for us within the current situation in Syria.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree more. I also realized that maybe one of the recommendations should have as well been to ask the donors and donor countries to ask the organizations and sectors where they invest otherwise to include a component of mine action, because I think, especially in Syria, that is extremely, extremely important, connecting to food security and livelihoods and, for example, to say the least, but then also early recovery sector, et cetera, et cetera. Since I don't see any questions further in the, there is, I see the colleague from MAG is raising his hand. Go ahead.
Thanks very much. Not a question, but perhaps another recommendation. I think as we look ahead, there's a real opportunity here also to draw a lot of lessons from the region. You've got neighbouring countries such as Lebanon and Iraq who have built really resilient and fantastic mine action programmes, rooted in civil society, rooted in good governance. And they've had those mine action programmes which have seen, partnerships, technical innovation, nationally owned strategies. And these have been supported as well by GICHD's Arab Outreach programme too. So I think, the more that we can get Syria talking to its neighbours, the brighter the future of the Syria mine action programme will be. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. Thank you to the panelists. Thank you, Joe. Thank you, Chris, and thank you, Nick. Thank you, Dave in Dhaka, for taking the time. Thank you, everybody online, for participating, and thank you, everybody in the room. And I hope we will continue to discuss Syria. We are also here throughout these 3 days, so don't hesitate to approach any of us. Thank you so much.